Okay, AP Chemistry, this is part 2 of the stoichiometry video, and this one is going to cover limiting excess problems, theoretical yield definitions, and percent yield problems. You can recognize a limiting excess stoichiometry problem by the fact that the mass of both reactants is given in the problem. The minute you see the mass of both reactants, a little voice inside your head says, this is a limiting excess problem. I am going to be doing stoichiometry a lot, and it is going to be a very high-level, multi-step problem. One of the reactants will get used up in the reaction. It is the limiting reactant. It limits the amount of product produced. It will produce the least amount of product, which is your theoretical yield. One of the reactants will not get used up. It will be left over. There will be a certain amount used to form the product, but there will be a certain amount left behind. That one is called the excess reactant. Now, here's a problem. Again, we're using the Haber process, just like before. In this problem, it is asking you about the theoretical yield of ammonia. Anytime you do a paper and pencil calculation of a product mass, it is the theoretical yield. So this is asking you about the theoretical yield of ammonia produced from 100 grams of nitrogen gas and 100 grams of hydrogen gas. So notice, if you will, both reactants. A mass of both reactants is given. This is a limiting reactant problem. There's a couple of different ways you can do this type of problem. I'm going to show you what I'm most comfortable with. If you have a different way, fine, as long as two things occur. Thing number one, you can show the logical steps you followed, and thing number two, you get the same answer, the correct answer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the quantity of reactant number 1, which is 100 grams of the nitrogen gas. And way down here, because I'm going to need some room, I'm going to write 100 grams of the hydrogen gas. What I'm going to basically do is two stoichiometry problems. I am going to figure out what mass of product can be made from this, and what mass of product can be made from the second reactant, and then compare my answers. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is convert it to moles of, because the balanced chemical equation is in the language of moles. So here's my molar mass ratio. Here's the stoichiometry ratio according to the balanced chemical equation. 2 moles of ammonia gas can be produced for every 1 mole of nitrogen. And then, since most questions ask you for the mass of the product, I'm going to go ahead and do molar mass of the product, which is ammonia gas. Here's the molar mass of ammonia gas. I'm going to do the math, and I get 121.6 grams of ammonia gas will be produced from 100 grams of nitrogen gas. Again, please note some of the things I told you before. This is the molar mass of the nitrogen. This is the stoichiometry. And this is the molar mass of the ammonia. And you are following a roadmap. You are converting from 100 grams of nitrogen gas, the reactant, and you are figuring out mathematically how much product that 100 grams will produce. And I'm going to do the same thing for my hydrogen. Change it from mass to moles using the molar mass of hydrogen gas. Also notice, please, a number, a unit, and an identity every time I do stoichiometry. According to the balanced chemical equation, 2 moles of ammonia will be produced for every 3 moles of hydrogen gas. Notice the balanced chemical equation. And Then I'm going to convert this to mass of product again. And I'm going to do the calculation in my calculator. And I'm going to figure out sig figs in a moment. All right, and again, here's my molar mass, this time of hydrogen gas, which is the second reactant. Here's my stoichiometry according to the balanced chemical equation. And here's my molar mass of my product. So here are two answers. And what you're basically asking yourself is, which one of these two reactants will make the least amount? Well, since this guy is the smaller of the two number, he is the least amount of product. That means that he, nitrogen gas, is the limiting reactant, and that means that hydrogen gas is in excess, and this here is going to be my theoretical yield because I calculated it. Theoretical yield and percent yield. Theoretical yield is the calculated quantity of product produced from the limiting the reactant. It is the value you get when you use paper and pencil and a balanced chemical equation. It's the amount of product you should theoretically get if you did the lab perfectly. And of course, labs are not done perfectly. Rarely will you get a 100% yield when you perform the lab after doing the math. Here's an analogy I like to use. On the pancake box, it tells you you should get 14 pancakes. You never really get 14 pancakes. You make them larger, you make them smaller, you might get more of them, you might get fewer of them. The theoretical yield of pancakes doesn't always match the actual. The theoretical yield from a balanced chemical equation is always going to be calculated with paper and pencil and will always be a larger amount than the experimental. Calculating the percent yield will be the experimental yield over the theoretical. Your experimental is what you did in the lab station, your theoretical is what you calculated on paper and pencil, and the theoretical will be a larger number. Right. Here is an example. We are going to use the value we got just in the last problem of 121.6 grams as our theoretical. This is the same process. This is the Haber process. And it asks, what if we reacted 100 grams of nitrogen gas, 100 grams of hydrogen gas, and the yield of ammonia is 107.4 grams. That's the actual or experimental. And we already calculated the theoreticals. I am going to follow the calculation I just gave you. Percent yield is actual, and theoretical we calculated a little while ago as that times 100%. Plug it into the calculator and you get, oops, I did not do this one right, sorry, 107.4 grams, thank you, 88.32%, because these both are 4 sig figs, so I'm good. So what this tells you is, this is the percentage So this is the percentage of the theoretical you made in the experiment, which is pretty good. Another way to look at it is you can use another analogy. Just like your grade, this would be the total points. This would be the number of points you were supposed to get if you did everything perfect. And this guy is the number of points you actually got. And your grade is 88%, so it's a high B. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the problem we did 2 slides ago. And what I want to do is use the excess. I want to focus on the excess reactant. And my excess reactant was the hydrogen gas. And if you recall, we figured out that 100 grams of hydrogen gas, and we calculated it that it was the excess reactant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically figure out how much hydrogen gas was used to produce the least amount of product. And the least amount of product was the 121.6 grams of ammonia. Okay, now keep in mind the nitrogen is gone. That was the limiting reactant. The hydrogen is considered an excess. And I am going to do a stoichiometry problem. I produced 121 grams of product, and I am going to do stoichiometry to determine how much of the hydrogen did I use to make this stuff. So molar mass of the nitrogen gas, stoichiometry of 3 moles of hydrogen for every 2 moles of the ammonia. This is from the balanced chemical equation. This is stoichiometry. Molar mass of the hydrogen, and if I do this math in my calculator, I find out that 21.6 grams of hydrogen gas was used, along with 100 grams of the other reactant, to produce 121.6 grams of product. Now my second question is, okay, I had 100 grams of hydrogen. I used 21.6 grams of hydrogen. So how much is left over? I had 100 to start with. I used 21.6 in the reaction, and that leaves 78.4 grams. I'm just going to check my work. I started with 100. I used 21.6. Yep. So 78.4 grams is left over. Right, this ends chapter 3, so we are going on to chapter 4.